I will never be that person again. I don't care if they kill me. These words echoed through the death chamber as Sean Richard Sellers lay strapped to a gurney inside Oklahoma State Penitentiary. At 12:17 a.m. on February 4th, 1999, the state carried out his execution by lethal injection. He was just 29 years old, the youngest person put to death for crimes committed as a juvenile since capital punishment resumed in 1976. The cruel irony wasn't lost on anyone. Sellers had entered death row at only 16, convicted of 3 brutal murders. For over a decade, his case crawled through endless appeals questioning his age, his mental state, and his claims of religious redemption. Supporters argued passionately that no teenager deserved the ultimate penalty, that he'd been twisted by dark beliefs and later transformed by faith. Yet no argument could erase what he'd done, shooting convenience store clerk Robert Bauer in cold blood, then murdering his own mother Vonda and stepfather Paul in their sleep. As the lethal chemicals flowed, witnesses watched Sellers close his eyes and whisper prayers. He spoke of forgiveness, of finding Christ, begging others not to follow his path. But the execution proceeded anyway, ending a life that began in youthful rebellion and ended under the weight of 3 coffins. His journey from troubled teenager to self-proclaimed born-again Christian sparked years of legal battles, psychiatric evaluations, and desperate pleas for mercy. The case left neighbors stunned, families shattered, and a community wrestling with an impossible question. Does justice mean mercy or death? To understand how a 16-year-old from Oklahoma City became the last juvenile offender executed in modern American history, we must go back to September 1985, to a quiet convenience store where a teenager pulled the trigger for the first time. Back to the moment when Sean Sellers crossed from troubled boy to convicted killer. Welcome to Crime Lens, where we examine the darkest corners of human nature. Sean Richard Sellers entered the world on May 18, 1969, in Corcoran, California. His mother, Vonda, was barely 16. His father, Richard, was 17 and already drowning in alcoholism. They'd married when Vonda was just 15, a union doomed from the start. Richard's drinking created constant chaos. Arguments filled their small home. By the time Sean was walking and beginning to talk, his parents' marriage was crumbling. At 3 years old, Sean experienced his first abandonment when his parents divorced. Richard essentially vanished from his son's life, leaving the boy with questions about his identity and worth that would haunt him forever. Vonda, now a single mother at 19, struggled to provide. She worked various jobs, often leaving Sean with family members. This constant shuffling meant he never had stable attachment figures during his most crucial developmental years. He primarily lived with his maternal grandfather, Jim Blackwell, and his wife, Geneva. They offered more stability than his biological parents ever had, but even this arrangement was temporary. When Sean was 4, Vonda met Paul Bellofatto, a truck driver and decorated Vietnam veteran. Paul, known as Lee, was stable and hardworking, offering the security Vonda desperately needed. When they married, Sean finally had a potential father figure. But Lee's profession kept him away for weeks at a time. When Vonda worked alongside him as a driving team, Sean was again left with relatives. Abandonment and return became the rhythm of his childhood. At 5, Sean moved with his mother and stepfather to Los Angeles, the first of approximately 30 moves he'd experienced before adulthood. They lived in an apartment complex owned by Lee's aunt, where strict rules required Sean to stay quiet constantly. He went from running freely outdoors to being confined to small spaces, always told to keep his voice down. School became a nightmare. Older boys bullied him relentlessly, not typical playground conflicts, but targeted intimidation. Groups of kids attacked him because he was different, a white boy from Oklahoma who didn't understand the social dynamics. Fear of going to school became Sean's daily reality. During this dark period, Sean experienced sexual abuse from an older male relative in the apartment complex. The relative coerced him into performing sexual acts, leaving the boy confused and ashamed. Sean never told anyone, believing he'd get in trouble. This violation added another layer of trauma to an already impossible situation. After 2 years, the family returned to Oklahoma, but the damage was done. Back in Oklahoma, Sean found temporary refuge with his grandparents, but stability remained elusive. Vonda and Lee continued moving him whenever their circumstances changed. By his early teens, Sean had experienced over 20 different moves, a childhood defined by constant disruption. Each move meant starting over at new schools. Making friends required time and consistency, neither of which existed in Sean's life. Rather than risk the pain of forming attachments that would inevitably break, he withdrew. He learned to prefer isolation over the repeated agony of loss. Even his name marked him as an outsider. At school, he was Sean Sellers. His guardians were the Blackwells. His mother and stepfather were the Bellofattos. In small towns where everyone knew each other's families, Sean's different surname made him feel like he didn't belong anywhere. Despite these challenges, Sean showed promise. He earned good grades and impressed teachers with his intelligence. He had a talent for drawing and loved comic books, escapes from his chaotic reality that provided something stable regardless of where he lived. In 1983, when Sean was 14, his family moved to Colorado. For the first time in years, he found an environment where he could thrive. The mountains provided stark beauty that appealed to his artistic nature. More importantly, he discovered the Civil Air Patrol. This auxiliary of the United States Air Force offered emergency services training and youth development programs. For Sean, it provided his first taste of belonging to something larger than himself. The program's emphasis on leadership, service, and personal development resonated with his desperate need for structure and achievement. Sean threw himself into Civil Air Patrol activities with unprecedented enthusiasm. He studied emergency response procedures, learned about aviation, and participated in search and rescue training. The program's clear hierarchy and merit-based advancement appealed to his intelligence and work ethic. Unlike school, where frequent moves made building achievements impossible, Civil Air Patrol offered a structured path to recognition. His dedication paid off remarkably. Sean advanced rapidly through the ranks and was selected as cadet commander of his squadron, the first time in his life that others had chosen him to lead. Lee was genuinely proud of Sean's achievements, and this approval meant everything. For once, Sean felt he was living up to expectations. Sean graduated from the emergency response training program with outstanding honors. He'd found something he was passionate about. The stability of staying in one place allowed him to form friendships and feel connected. For the first time, Sean could envision a positive future. Then, Vonda and Lee decided to move back to Oklahoma. When Sean learned about the planned move, he begged his parents to reconsider. He pleaded to stay in Colorado, even suggesting alternative living arrangements. Civil Air Patrol had become central to his identity. Colorado represented the first place he'd felt truly successful and accepted. His pleas were ignored. Vonda and Lee saw the move as a practical necessity, not understanding they were destroying the first positive trajectory Sean's life had ever taken. The loss of his Civil Air Patrol position, his friends, and his sense of belonging created a devastating psychological wound. The return to Oklahoma in 1984 marked Sean's complete breakdown. At 15, he tasted success only to have it ripped away. This loss felt different because now he understood what he was losing. Not just a location, but an identity and a future. Back in Oklahoma, Sean withdrew completely. He refused to engage, no longer summoning the energy to rebuild relationships or adapt to new surroundings. The contrast between his success in Colorado and his current situation created bitter rage. In Colorado, he'd been a respected leader. In Oklahoma, he was just another displaced kid with no connections. His academic performance, while adequate, lacked enthusiasm. He completed assignments but participated minimally. Teachers saw him as quiet and withdrawn, just another teenager going through a difficult phase. At home, Sean spent increasing time alone, avoiding interaction with Vonda and Lee. He felt betrayed by their decision to move him from the one place he'd been happy. Resentment built steadily as he realized his parents had prioritized their convenience over his well-being. During this isolation and anger, Sean began exploring darker ways to understand his place in the world. His artwork took on disturbing themes. He was drawn to imagery that reflected his alienation and opposition to a world that had repeatedly disappointed him. It was during this vulnerable time that Sean encountered satanic material. Initially, this was intellectual curiosity rather than religious commitment. He was drawn to alternative belief systems that challenged conventional morality and offered explanations for the unfairness he'd experienced. Sean met other students interested in witchcraft and alternative spirituality. These connections provided his first sense of belonging since leaving Colorado. Unlike Civil Air Patrol, which emphasized service and positive ideals, these interests offered rebellion and the promise of personal power. The progression from curiosity to deeper involvement happened gradually. Sean began reading about black magic and Satanism, finding frameworks that seemed to explain his anger and offer solutions to his powerlessness. The literature suggested he could control his life through ritual and force of will. By his 16th birthday in May 1985, Sean's daily life revolved around satanic practices. He'd read Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible hundreds of times, treating it as his primary guide. The book's philosophy of self-interest and rejection of conventional morality spoke to his growing alienation. His bedroom became a shrine to these beliefs. He performed daily rituals, often staying awake for extended periods. He took amphetamines to maintain energy for marathon ceremony sessions. The psychological changes were becoming visible. His mother told him she thought he was going crazy, but no adult intervened. Sean formed a close friendship with Richard Howard, another teenager who shared his interest in Satanism and violent fantasies. Their conversations became increasingly extreme, discussing rape, torture, and murder as if these were normal topics. They planned elaborate crimes with no intention of carrying them out, or so they initially believed. One frequent discussion topic involved Robert Bauer, a clerk at a Circle K convenience store who had refused to sell Richard beer. In their distorted thinking, Bauer's adherence to store policy became a personal insult, warranting retaliation. The 32-year-old clerk had no idea two teenagers were planning his murder. On September 8, 1985, Richard arrived at the Circle K with Sean. Bauer welcomed them with his usual friendliness. They purchased drinks and talked for about an hour, asking questions about store security. Bauer confirmed there were no surveillance cameras, unknowingly providing crucial information to his killers. Richard had brought his grandfather's .357 revolver loaded with hollow point bullets. When Bauer stepped outside to help Richard with a car problem, Sean initially froze. He walked around the building, overcome by what he was about to do. But something shifted. He later described hearing a voice calling him weak and cowardly. Sean returned with cold determination. As Richard distracted Bauer, Sean raised the revolver and aimed at Bauer's head. The first shot missed when Bauer flinched. The terrified clerk ran toward the back, falling as he tried to escape. Grabbing a green windbreaker as protection, Bauer crouched behind the counter, his eyes filled with panic and confusion. Sean fired a third shot that struck Bauer in the torso, killing him. Robert Bauer, who'd spent his last hour trying to help two teenagers, was dead at 32, killed by a boy who wanted to experience what murder felt like. They fled, laughing in the car about what they'd done, treating the murder as an exciting prank. The police investigation made little progress without witnesses or security footage. Sean and Richard weren't considered suspects. Living with murder's secret didn't burden Sean. Instead, it seemed to validate his satanic beliefs and reinforce his sense of being different. Within his twisted worldview, Bauer's death represented spiritual achievement rather than moral transgression. However, Sean's relationship with his parents continued deteriorating. The primary conflict was his relationship with Angel, a 15-year-old dropout his mother strongly disapproved of. These arguments became the focal point for all Sean's accumulated anger. The successful murder of Bauer had given him confidence that he could eliminate obstacles through violence. By early 1986, Sean regularly dreamed about killing his parents. He began planning their deaths, viewing Vonda and Lee as the primary barriers to his independence. His first attempt involved mixing rat poison into his mother's coffee, but when this failed, he planned a more direct approach. On March 5, 1986, Sean had been awake for 3 days, sustained by amphetamines and violent fantasies. That evening brought another confrontation about Angel. For Sean, this represented yet another attempt to control his life. He waited until his parents were asleep, then retrieved Lee's .44 revolver. Dressed only in black underwear to minimize blood spatter, he demonstrated calculated planning despite his psychological breakdown. The first shot struck Lee in the head. The sound woke Vonda, but she had no time to understand what was happening. Sean fired at his mother, but she raised her head and the bullet struck her face. He fired a third shot to ensure she was dead. Afterward, Sean felt what he described as relief, liberation from people who represented authority and control. He carefully staged the scene to appear like a home invasion robbery, then drove to Richard's house to hide the weapons and establish his alibi. The plan initially worked perfectly. The Oklahoma City police initially treated the Bellofatto murders as a home invasion. Sean's emotional response appeared genuine to investigators. He seemed truly shocked and devastated. His performance was convincing enough that suspicion focused elsewhere. But as detectives examined the scene more carefully, inconsistencies emerged. The staging appeared too deliberate. Experienced investigators suspected the scene had been arranged to mislead them. The breakthrough came when detectives began connecting unsolved cases, including Bauer's murder. Richard Howard became a person of interest. Under interrogation pressure, facing potential murder charges, Howard broke. He confessed everything: Sean's role in Bauer's murder, his confession about killing his parents, and where the weapons were hidden. Howard's cooperation came at significant cost. Initially charged with first-degree murder, he eventually accepted a plea agreement requiring testimony against Sean in exchange for reduced charges. This saved him from death penalty, but required accepting responsibility for his role. Sean's arrest in 1986 shocked the community. People who'd known him as a polite, intelligent teenager struggled to understand how someone so young could commit such brutal crimes. The investigation revealed a pattern of instability, trauma, and mental health issues building throughout his childhood. Sean's trial began with Oklahoma seeking the death penalty, At 17, he faced becoming one of the youngest people executed since capital punishment resumed. The prosecution built their case primarily on Howard's testimony. They emphasized the premeditated nature of all three murders, arguing Sean had carefully planned each killing. Sean's defense team, working with only $750 for expert witnesses, attempted to present mitigating factors. They focused on his age, difficult childhood, and involvement in Satanism. A psychiatric expert testified Sean was legally unconscious during the murders, suffering from either insanity or automatism preventing him from forming criminal intent. The prosecution countered with their own expert, who couldn't rule out the defense assessment but also couldn't confirm severe mental illness. Judge Charles Owens made several rulings limiting the defense's effectiveness. He refused expert testimony about developmental differences between juveniles and adults, and wouldn't instruct the jury that Sean's age was automatically a mitigating factor. On October 2, 1986, the jury found Sean guilty on all counts and recommended death. At the time, Oklahoma law didn't allow life without parole, an option that became available just 1 year later. Sean arrived on death row at 17. The early years were marked by continued satanic practices, but eventually he experienced what he claimed was genuine religious conversion to Christianity. This transformation was met with skepticism, especially from his stepfamily, who remained convinced it was manipulation. The most significant development came in 1992 when Sean was diagnosed with multiple personality disorder by mental health professionals. Brain imaging showed different brainwave patterns corresponding to different personality states. 3 experts identified at least 3 distinct personalities, possibly 8. This diagnosis raised profound questions about legal culpability. If the murders were committed by alternate personalities, was executing Sean killing an innocent person? However, because MPD hadn't been identified at trial, courts ruled this evidence couldn't be considered on appeal. As Sean's execution approached, his case attracted massive international attention. Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the European Union, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and the American Bar Association all opposed his execution. A juror from his original trial, Diana Cron, publicly regretted her death sentence vote, believing knowledge of Sean's mental illness would have changed the verdict. Despite growing support, Oklahoma Governor Frank Keating refused clemency, having publicly stated no one would receive mercy during his administration. The Pardon and Parole Board voted 5-0 to deny clemency. On February 4, 1999, at 12:17 a.m., Sean Richard Sellers was pronounced dead. His final statement addressed his stepfamily. "When you wake up in the morning, you're not going to feel any different. You're going to hate me just as much tomorrow." His family felt these words lacked genuine remorse. The international response was swift and critical. 6 years later, the Supreme Court would rule in Roper v. Simmons that executing juvenile offenders violates the Constitution, a decision that came too late to save Sean's life. Sean Sellers died as the last person executed for crimes committed at age 16. His case remains one of the most thoroughly documented examples of juvenile crime, mental illness, and capital punishment intersecting in American legal history. What do you think? Should someone so young ever face the death penalty? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to Crime Lens for more true crime investigations that examine the complexities of justice.